Okay, I think we'll make a start. So thank you very much for joining this webinar today. This is the third in a series of webinars that have been hosted by Leading Figures. My name is Jane Welsh and I'm an associate of Leading Figures. Over the past couple of years, Leading Figures has conducted a survey into attitudes towards leadership and leadership development, as well as a series of interviews with leaders across financial and professional services to explore the concept of leadership and how people develop. And Russell, if you could move on to the next slide. Thank you. And what we've identified is that there are a whole series of layers to the development of a leader, from innate qualities through emotional development and intelligence to self-awareness and a number of leadership techniques that people learn along the way. But we've also identified a whole host of people who help us develop as leaders, from our family through to mentors, coaches and sponsors. One of the issues that's come up in our research is around strategic leadership. This ability to scan the environment, make sense of it, and to steer a course. But just how can you do that when everything around you is changing? And just this year, organisations have had to deal with planning for Brexit, the impact of COVID, and over the summer with the tragic killing of George Floyd and the kind of increasing focus on Black Lives Matter movement, having to think about how that impacts on their organisation and on broader society. So in this session, we're going to be exploring the nature of strategic leadership and how to navigate in the face of volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. So if I could have the next slide, please, and I can introduce our panel today. So we're joined by Jackie Boylan, who's head of UK advisory business for Fidelity International and was previously head of customer relations at BT Financial Group in Australia. Romael Karam, who is in FX sales for Refinitiv and was previously CEO and head of trading at Harmonic Capital. And finally, Fraser Smart, who's CEO of the BA Pension Fund and was previously head of Buck Consulting. So I'm now going to hand over to Russell Borland, who's going to host the panel session.
Thanks, Jane. Good morning, everyone, and warm welcome to our panel, Jackie, Romael and Fraser. Many thanks for your time here. I just thought we could perhaps just kick off with a simple question on a big matter, but you know, given that strategy quite often is regarded as something a bit intangible, it'd be really helpful if maybe you could describe in your own words what strategy means. And maybe I'll just start with Fraser and I'll then ask Romael and Jackie for their views. So Fraser, strategy, what does it mean?
So dictionary definitions, plan of action designed to achieve a longer term aim, which is nice and easy to say, but an awful lot more difficult to execute. So I kind of regard that as making sure you've got targets in place that you're trying to achieve. I look after 2 pension funds here at British Airways that are at very different stages of maturity. So the targets that I'm trying to set for those funds with our trustees are very, very different in nature. So they've both got their end points that they're working towards. But the next part then is to set a journey of how we're going to get there. So what are the key things that we need to be doing to help to deliver that, and then being ready to adjust course depending on the things that come along and impact on the way through. I think that's the nice, easy technical part of doing that, and it shouldn't be underestimated, because getting stakeholders on board to create the target and the stepping points is hard enough. But the bit I think that really makes a difference for strategy is about inspiring a vision in the team and a real sense of purpose that what we're doing matters. And at British Airways, I've one of the things that's been really helpful is that we have set out on boards around the building the key areas that we're trying to deliver for our trustees and what we're going to do year by year. And then what we do is we update those every few months. We've got them on the wall in sections, effectively on a vertical timeline, and we take off the section and we show the progress against the targets that we've set. So everybody in the business is reminded every time they walk through the door, in or out, of what we're trying to achieve, who we're trying to achieve it for, and what we've actually managed to do so far. And I found that really empowering in getting everybody behind our strategy and understanding what it is that we're trying to achieve.
Right, thank you, Fraser. That's really helpful. Romael, your thoughts on what strategy is?
Yeah, very similar to Fraser. I like to kind of whittle it down to something basic in terms of it's basically a plan and a goal that you set, a vision and a plan to move towards that. That for me is what strategy is in its basic sense. And when you're looking at an entire business, for us, we had a plan, and the partners, the managing partners, all bought into that. And then we need to make sure that every department, on a regular basis, we had quarterly meetings with each line manager, each area, to make sure that their plans fit into our plans that deliver the ultimate goal. And that for me is strategy in terms of making sure everyone pulls in the same direction and does their bit for the kind of the common goal.
Thanks, Romael. And I guess one thing is people might be thinking, how long is strategy? How long, how far into distance do we look? And I know we can't be precise. I'm not expecting, 3.5 years or anything, but, what broadly in your experience, how far might you be looking?
Well, I think like any goal setting, you might want to have as a 5, 3 and 1 year plan,
right,
for instance, or a time frame that is relevant to your business. Yeah. For us at Harmonic, we had very short-term goals that were very kind of important to the business survival, but we also had longer-term plans that we sometimes didn't even know could even be around, and we weren't in the end to get to them. It doesn't mean you need to neglect those longer-term plans. Yeah. But like your health, right? You want to live till you're 80. You're not gonna, you need to make plans for that.
Yes, indeed. And I saw you nodding an agreement there, Jackie. So what are your thoughts on strategy, and to what extent, has what Fraser and Romael have said, do it resonates with you?
Yeah, absolutely. When I was thinking about this, for me, strategy is all encompassing, and it may not be the strict textbook definition of the word, but it's the purpose behind why we all come to work. It's the vision and the aspiration that we want to achieve. And then a strategy, overall tells me how I'm going to actually get there. So for me, it is the path to achieving goals, and they're not just commercial goals, and I think strategy has probably moved on a lot from 50 years ago when it was just, how much profit do we make? And I think strategy tends to be more all-encompassing now. And I would just say it can't be set in stone. I think that's very clear. And if we needed any proof point, the last 8-9 months has shown us that, you need to be able to tilt and pivot. And in terms of longevity or how long-term is a strategy, for me, I think the world changes way too fast for it to be 10 years. I think having a vision, that stretches out to 10 years is not a bad thing. But I think strategically, probably 5 years is really, about all you can take. And as Romael said, it's probably a 1 and 3 year kind of plan to get to your 5-year strategy.
Thanks, Jackie, and thank you all. That's a great start just to get us into the mindset of what strategies like. And I just think it may be a good time now for us to ask the audience their view on strategy. And we've got a poll that, Thomas, I think we can run to get the input from our audience, which is now we've got just over 100 folk on the call.
Yes, Russell, thank you, and good morning, everyone. The poll question is, how well do you think people in your organisation understand its strategy? And I'll just launch the poll now. 70% of you have so far responded and rising. 80% now, still rising. I think we can probably end the poll there and share the results, and you'll see Russell, 62% are saying that they understand strategy a bit, 10% not at all.
Thanks, Thomas. Perhaps not too surprising, but obviously it'll vary from organisation to organisation. And maybe something we'll pick up later is, to what extent does it really matter? So thanks, Thomas. Very interesting. Okay, as I say, we'll pick up on that. But before we do that, I just, going back to what Jane was saying at the start, we've had a huge amount of turbulence this year. And so my next question is, as leaders, to what extent, has the recent events affected or changed or had any influence on your leadership style? So maybe again, I'll go back to Fraser. To what extent has recent events affected your leadership style, if at all?
I wouldn't say that recent events have changed my style. I think my style is what it is, and I think it can be quite successful in certain circumstances and potentially less successful in others. But what it has done is made me think very carefully about how my leadership style impacts others in our organisation. If I go right the way back to March, when we were seeing a rise in COVID cases, my kind of innate style is about caring about our people and about their well-being. And to my mind, the government was being too slow to take decisions at that point, and I wanted to keep our people safe. And I had to call, in the face of quite some pushback from some of my senior team, ultimately to make the decision as CEO is that I wanted people to be working from home, because I thought that was a safer place for them to be. And that was quite a difficult decision to make, because it did involve a bit of conflict with others who just didn't see the risks. And I think there's maybe an element of, I've had some ill health in my history, and recognizing that just because people look fit and healthy on the outside, they might not necessarily be on the inside. And what I was trying to recognize is that we have a huge spectrum across the business, and I just didn't know what people's personal circumstances were, and you can't ask. So it was there's a little bit of a reaction to that at the time. We didn't have kit to make everybody effective, so it was reassuring people that even if we were sending them home and they couldn't be effective, that wasn't a problem, and they should just sit tight. We would get kit to them as soon as we could do, and within 2 weeks we were back up to being 100% effective, and people being very effective. And then you move into that next phase of, we're working remotely. How do we keep engaged? How do we keep in contact with people, make sure that they're doing okay? So I think at each point you're having to kind of emphasize and re-emphasize the things that are kind of core to your skill set, and just try to look at your weak points as well. So I was making sure that I was communicating regularly with the team. We started doing regular surveys or pulse surveys just to see how people were feeling, anonymous, so they could say whatever they like, organising social events and so on. And then the next challenge then was that we had a huge increase in work. So my role in a pension fund is about making sure our members feel that their benefits are secure. Well, at the point where many of them think that their jobs are at risk, workloads go up massively. So the next stage is then to provide resource to help the team get through work and to manage our members. So actually, there were lots of different points there where I had to think about my leadership style and think about which bits to emphasize, but not necessarily pretending to be somebody that I'm not, because I just don't think that comes across as being an authentic leader.
So it sounds as though you really were proactive in responding to events, and I just wondered if, to what extent you feel that affected your personal energy.
We were very proactive in responding to events, and indeed some of our, I work with trustee directors, many of whom are British Airways employees, and it was an interesting contrast to hear some of the people say there, if we'd had the same level of clarity about how we were responding internally as you did with your team, we think we would have felt better supported through the process. And I think it's hard to keep that level of energy remotely. But at the same time, when we were sending out regular, at one point, communications every couple of days, and the bit that I really love about the team here is that it's not just communicating into a void. That I'll get people back sending me messages back saying, "Look, thanks very much for the update. Really appreciate it. Actually, how are you doing? Are you managing to, I know you like to exercise a lot. Are you finding it a real problem being stuck inside?" And just getting that personal bit of reflection of people thinking about me whilst I was thinking about them was fantastically self-sustaining throughout.
Right. Okay. Well, thanks for sharing on that, Fraser. Thanks. Maybe I could just go to Jackie and get your thoughts on to what extent, if any, has recent events have you noticed any change in your style in leadership across the business?
Yeah, relatively similar to Fraser. I think my leadership style hasn't changed, but I'm kind of sharper or more acutely aware of my team and how they might be feeling. And again, I hope I've always been like that, but I think a few things to pick up on what Fraser was saying. More communication absolutely has been critical throughout this time period, and that back and forth communication and getting feedback, focusing on well-being and providing different opportunities and options for people. We've run quite a few webinars around, how to cope with stress and how to deal with the kids when they're at home and you're trying to homeschool and that kind of thing, although that feels like a distant memory for some of us. I think being, celebrating the achievements and how hard people have been working, or the little things that we've been doing. And in terms of communication, there is something to be said for being visible, even if you don't really have much to say. So I will quite often just send a note saying, "Oh, I walked down my stairs again today and couldn't believe I'm still at home. But how is everyone?" So it's not really anything to do with work or business, but it's humanizing, I think, has come through a lot in this period, that we're all the same. I think Fraser made a good point as well around being really aware of everyone's situations and how they might be different. And probably us on this panel are relatively privileged, and we can go at home and we can probably get into our office or a spare room, but being aware that many of our people don't have that luxury, I suppose. They might be in a share house, they might be sitting on their bed with a laptop. And so how do you make sure that they're okay, and that you let them know that it is okay to be working like that, or to be working how they need to. And I think the other thing, a really relevant quote I only read last night, actually, it said, "Leaders throughout this period that display inspiration, hope and optimism, but tempered by reality, will really get the best results for their team." And I thought that really resonated with me. We can't ignore what's going on, but providing that hope for people is really important.
Yeah. And how might you articulate that hope to your team?
Sorry, can you say that again?
Yeah, how might you articulate hope for the future to your team?
Yeah, I think it's part of what I just said. So it is talking about what we're achieving as a business and how we're continuing to do quite well throughout this period, and celebrating the little things. We've generated an immense amount of client loyalty throughout this period just by being open for business. So again, communicating that, And actually going back to our purpose, which is trying to help our clients build better financial futures. So how do we actually feel that we've done? And people, I mean, my team tell me how proud they are of how we've gone through this period. So, you know, communication, talking about the good things, but also letting them know that it's okay, you know, if things aren't working out for them.
Great, thanks, Jackie. So there's a common theme there of maybe leadership styles not changing, but you're focusing very much on the people aspect of your leadership roles and the motivation there. And I just wondered, Romael, does that conversation resonate with you?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, now that I'm on the other side, I'm looking at my leaders, I've seen some notable signs of kind of positive things. So we were well equipped to move to kind of the virtual working environment. So we're very fortunate in that respect. But I have seen leadership styles change, particularly at the very beginning. I think there was a nervousness from some of the kind of newer line managers, kind of newer to management, and they kind of initially maybe tried to lead with a bit of an iron fist and really keep an eye on activity and numbers. And then there was an ease off of that, a notable ease off, when I think they got the confidence that people were committed and working. And right through to now, where, you know, some of my conversations with my kind of people who are managing me are just chats. Even, you know, our weekly reviews or, you know, bi-weekly reviews. Sometimes we don't even talk about business for a 45-minute session, maybe the first 30 minutes about what they did in the gym that week, or, you know, that kind of crazy stuff, right? And it's just nice to kind of have that interaction, because that's one of the biggest things that's missing. It's very easy to have a formal meeting, but the day-to-day interaction is the biggest change that you lose. And on that point as well, I think our business has done a fantastic job of staying visible and communicating with the staff. For instance, the fact that I've not seen some of our kind of senior leadership team hasn't affected me because of the regular webinars and town halls and all the kind of stuff that we do. They are still very visible. And I hadn't realized that until I actually thought about it. I thought about it when we were kind of preparing for this webinar. I thought, actually, they've done a great job of that. So yeah, and the other thing is removing any uncertainty that the business can. So obviously we're in an environment right now where we don't know when the restaurants are going to open again, or when can we go down a pub and see our friends, or, you know, what can we do at Christmas? Well, we know now, but you know, and then to have more uncertainty about, we don't know when we're going to go back to work, for instance, that's difficult. And it's less difficult for me because, you know, like me, like so many of us, as Jackie said, we're privileged. I've got my own property and an office and all that kind of stuff, which is fantastic. But there's people who are renting close to work. Now, as soon as you remove the uncertainty and say, okay, we're not going to go back to the office for the next 6 months at least, then they can at least decide, you know, should I surrender my lease? Should I go live with my parents? Should I go share with somebody else? And so our business has done a fantastic job. Very early on, they said, we're not going to go back to the office until the turn of the year at the very earliest. And as soon as we had some stricter measures in place, we're not going to go back to the office until the end of June at the earliest, but the office will be open should people need it. So it just removes any uncertainty for me, for childcare, for juggling things. I think they've done a fantastic job of that. So, you know, you've got to help your team with those easy wins, because there's an awful lot of other turbulence and uncertainty out there that we're all dealing with, right?
Yeah. Thanks, Romael. Thomas, I wonder if it's a good time for us to take any Q&A on what's been discussed from the audience.
There is a question there from Brian Fleming. Why doesn't style need to change when you're leading remotely? Or surely there are different skills needed. So why doesn't style need to change when you're leading remotely?
Okay. Jackie, maybe I could ask you just to comment on that.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say that style doesn't need to change. I think it depends on what your style is originally, whether it might need to change when you're remote or not. So I would say it may well need to change if you're someone that's really comfortable with that meeting face-to-face type of environment, and that's how you connect with your team, then if you are working from home, you might need to make an extra effort to picking up a phone, to understanding how people's lives are different when they're in a working from home environment. But I think broadly saying a style needs to change because you're working from home, I wouldn't necessarily agree with that, but I think it depends on what your style is in the first place. Thanks,
Jackie. And I'll just ask Fraser then to comment, because you've obviously been thinking about this significantly. And I just, what are your thoughts on this question?
Yeah, so I'm quite well aligned with Jackie. Brian, I completely get the kind of premise of the question. I'm not saying for 1 second that you don't think very carefully about how you communicate, how you lead. But what I was trying to get over is that I have a particular set of skills. I have my own style, and the authenticity and the impact of that, I think, is much stronger if people recognise that I'm still managing and leading in a way that looks like me. So what I've been doing is emphasising and de-emphasising particular bits of my skill set, and we have changed the way we've been communicating. There's absolutely no two ways about that. We're doing it more often. We're being really thoughtful about the messages. I liked the idea that was mentioned of this balance of hope against reality. It's really difficult to do it, but one of the things that was very successful for me was just being exceptionally transparent with people about how we were thinking. And as there was uncertainty from government about potentially getting back to the office, about saying, here's how we think we might respond to the next stage, but obviously we need to understand where guidance is. And we had quite a lot of external factors impacting on us during the period as well, and it was just trying to reflect these as they as they come through over time. We were hit by a well-publicised number. 12,000 redundancies were announced at British Airways. Now, I am not employed by British Airways. My team is not employed by British Airways, but we co-locate in the same building so we can be near to our pension scheme members. And the impact of that number of people losing their jobs and trying to keep up morale in our team, but making sure that there's an understanding of the impact. This is precisely the point where we can make a huge difference to people's lives. They're feeling insecure about their financial futures, and we are here to give them that level of security. And it's where the team absolutely excelled. And the best bit of all, I didn't have to do anything style-wise. I had one of the managers in the team send out a note to our staff saying, this is the time where we can make the difference for our members. And if we help them now, it will just make such a difference for this phase of their life and give them comfort for the next 12 months as they move into the next phase. And the best bit for me was seeing one of our managers doing that without any prompting from me whatsoever. So I guess that's where I come from in style. And it was all through being true to who I am, but trying to recognise the impact that has on others.
Thanks, Fraser. And it must be hugely satisfying for you to see a member of your team doing that, and pretty inspirational that they've got that ability and confidence to do that. So that's a great story. Thank you. Maybe we will come back to more questions later on, but maybe we could, now just talk about strategy itself. And, given the pace of change and the uncertainty, what does strategy mean at the moment? So if you're going, are we going into a scenario of at the end of the calendar year, we're going to have, big strategies, long-term strategy gazing and etc. Or is that changing? Or are we still going through the same processes, but the results might be quite different? And maybe Fraser, you could comment again on that, and then I'll come back to the other panelists.
Sorry, Russell, you're looking for me. You cut out for a millisecond.
Sorry, yes.
Yes. Yeah. So if I come back to strategy is about having this long-term aim. The way I've always looked at it is a little bit like having a roadmap. and you find that a road is closed for whatever reason. There's a traffic snarl up, and the old-fashioned way is that you get your road atlas out and you plot your new route. And I regard this year as being very similar, that you're constantly modifying based on new information coming in, but your end goal doesn't necessarily change. Now, I don't want that to sound like we're doggedly going to stick to whatever we said that the ultimate destination was going to be, cannot change, whatever. Actually, it might do. And, if I can kind of, in answering this, if I can pick up one of the other questions that Brian has posted up, we were facing a situation in terms of a trustee board managing a pension fund with very long-term liabilities, that the airline was not bringing in any revenue, and indeed the airline was giving out more money than it was bringing in. People weren't paying for flights. The people who had paid for flights but weren't able to take them had to get their money back. That's not it's a disastrous place for an airline to be. And as CEO, I had to help our trustees think the unthinkable in terms of strategy. So what if the airline is not here anymore? What if the airline doesn't exist in the form that it does today? Now, it's quite difficult to imagine a situation where we couldn't have a British Airways. So, we have done role playing, scenario playing, to think about how some of those futures might change. And the one thing I would say that I found completely different from pre-COVID is I struggled to get people to engage on my trustee boards for this stuff. So I think my role as CEO is to plan for the worst, hope for the best. Trying to get people to engage in this scenario planning was so frustrating. They just didn't get it. And suddenly it was like, we can see why we need to do this now. So I now have a willing audience of trustee directors, and we've been through scenarios. And we had a fantastic day session together. And the first headline that was put up, mock-up headline, FT, British Airways goes into administration. It's like, what do we do now? Now, it's not a situation we ever want to find ourselves in. But what it allowed people to do was have a safe space to think about what these unimaginable futures would be like and what we would need to do. And it was not because I ever thought we would get to one, but I think when you are then hit with a really strong headwind and pushed off track, realizing that that's a normal thing and not struggling to react to it or being paralyzed is such a powerful thing. And that's the benefit I've seen with our trustee boards through the course of the summer, that I do think they're now prepared for whatever might come. So if there's another wave of COVID or vaccines don't work or people don't return to travel and the airline has to shrink again, I think they'll be ready for that, for whatever's thrown at us. And we can come up with a new strategy if we need to. We can come up with a new plan.
Thanks, Fraser. So in a way, you've really helped the trustees know how to respond to situations rather than just a reaction. Okay, thank you. That's great insight there. Wonder if I could bring Romael you in, and you've talked openly about your challenges in guiding Harmonic through various challenges in setting strategy and agreeing where you're going. I wondered if you could perhaps comment on that, and what have you learned from that could be applied to any changing situation for a business?
Yeah, so one of the things to take away from Fraser's comment, I think, which one of our partners shared with me, was if you're comfortable with the worst possible outcome, so if you understand what the worst possible outcome could be and you get comfortable with that, then anything between now and that you can deal with. Essentially, you'll be comfortable with, so you'll kind of get used to the uncertainty a little bit more. So that's a nice little thing to remember. And I think we can apply it personally as well. What if I get made redundant? What if my business I'm working for fails, or whatever it may be? So that's a nice little takeaway that I always remember. Moving back to Harmonic, really kind of leading and kind of setting the strategy through difficult periods essentially as soon as I took over, or even in the process of taking over Harmonic and planning the management buyout, it was nothing but one challenge after another. And even that process where we were trying to negotiate with the founding partners and kind of navigate the business through this period was a difficult one. And we were pretty much stuck in a boardroom for about best part of 10 weeks, discussing and negotiating and planning. And bearing in mind, the 6 of us had actual day jobs that we should have been doing, either be kind of actually trading or doing research or sales, but in addition to that, managing teams and being present, right? And it took an awful lot of kind of, put a lot of stress on the employees as well, seeing us kind of in that room with no real communication why that's happening. We weren't in a position to be able to communicate that. Once we did, it helped. But then I remember one incident where, I kept seeing certain individuals from the leadership team coming in looking kind of really beaten up and tired. And I sat down and I said, listen, guys, we have a responsibility not to look totally beaten up and tired, because it's going to worry the hell out of our staff, right? So perk up a bit. The response I got was, we're not into amateur psychology, and it was kind of ignored. I didn't have the kind of leadership experience really to kind of make a notable change there or influence them any further. But the point is, we need to look like we're dealing with these things, but at the same time, we can't look like it's not affecting us. We've got to be realistic. So obviously, we're all human, and we've got to show that certain things are difficult, but at the same time, we've got to look like we're battling through and we're bouncing back, so that the staff and your team don't feel like so they can feel they can get confidence from your leadership style and your energy. Otherwise, if you're not going to lead them through those difficult periods with some kind of positive outlook and optimism, as Jackie said, then who will? You can't expect them to kind of get that from themselves. It's not their business. So yeah, bottom line, look strong, be mentally tough, and but be human about it. The additional point I'd like to make is also the support network that you have and how you look after yourself from a health and well-being perspective. I remember coming into the office almost like 6 a.m. every day, drinking too much coffee, and I thought, well, this needs to stop, right? Because dealing with it in this way isn't going to help, and not having lunches and that kind of stuff. So I made a big change where I came in even earlier, did some quiet work, went to the gym when everybody else was coming in, so I could get some kind of space in my head, and come back having had breakfast a little bit later at 9:30, but nevertheless ready to kind of take on the day. And that helped me. I also was very fortunate to obviously have Russell and Thomas on board, helping us with the kind of with the planning and kind of the leadership kind of challenges that I had and the greater team had. But I also had other people to support me as well. And my physio, for instance, who was running his own business, we had regular coffees talking about just business strategy. And it doesn't have to be somebody in finance; it can be anybody. Your family at home, understanding that going home and playing with the kids is a good break, and taking that mental break. So you've got to look after yourself and encourage that with your staff. And here at Refinitiv, we've been encouraged to look after ourselves as well. And I would kind of use that as a guiding principle. As kind of, I think, if you're not healthy and fit and got a clear head, how can you deal with these challenges, and how can you expect your team to be optimistic and energetic for every working day in this type of environment?
Thanks, Romael. It's a really, really important point. We can quite so often be thinking of everybody else, and we ignore our own needs. And, just to link it into Fraser, when you're on a plane and the safety briefing comes up, the advice always is put your oxygen mask on first before you help other people. Otherwise, presumably, if you don't, you won't be in a position to help other people. So thanks, Romael. And could I bring Jackie in on this point? What were your thoughts on, how strategy is being affected by, you know, the turbulence, how do you set strategy? What's the relevance of it in the short, you know, given such volatile environment?
Yeah, can I just pick up on one point before I answer that? I would say the looking after yourself is so important. I booked in a Zoom free hour from midday to 1 for my whole team. So it was like, you know, no one can booking time. And my PA said, well, I'll start changing your diary. And I said, oh, no, that doesn't apply to me. You know, I don't need a Zoom free hour. Of course I don't. But she's kind of slowly made it happen, and oh my gosh, it is fantastic. So I do think kind of looking after yourself and not expecting yourself to be superhuman. You obviously need to be positive and energetic and resilient, but you kind of need to look after yourself. But in terms of strategy, you know, in these times, it actually becomes even more important, doesn't it? That you know where you're going. You know, you've got a strong purpose that supports the strategy. And when it's really uncertain, it's almost comforting to know that you know and your team knows where you're going. Now, that doesn't mean that you may not need to divert or reevaluate. So we definitely reevaluated what we were doing. So I think that's a positive in terms of uncertainty, is it does give you a chance to look at your strategy and think, is it still okay? Is it still right? Is it still relevant? So ours was, but what we've found throughout this time, which I am putting a positive spin on it, because clearly there's been some really difficult circumstances, but we have moved faster than we've ever moved before. I mean, some technology enhancements that I've been banging on about for 2 years happened in about 5 weeks, and that is not exaggerating. We could never have digital signatures because apparently the risk was too high, yet within a couple of weeks we implemented digital signatures. So, you know, it's interesting how some of this uncertainty can actually drive some positives from a strategic perspective and also a behavioural perspective. I think we've experimented more. It's enabled us to try some new things in what we probably consider a little bit of a safer environment, because everything's uncertain anyway. So if it goes wrong, it doesn't feel like it's as bad. And I think the other thing throughout this period that's become more magnified, and I'm sure everyone will have something to say about this, is just that focus on sustainability and community. And that's really kind of risen to the top in terms of our initiatives from a strategic perspective, and just being more aware of how important it is and how much we want our world to continue. And, you know, we all play a role in that.
Thanks, Jackie. Thomas, I wonder if this is are there any questions you think that fit what we've been talking about with the panelists?
Yeah, there is one actually just in from Graham McWilliam saying, do you think we can change the culture we've had for many years to work long hours? Many companies are reporting longer working hours while staff are remote working. So it would, I guess, be interesting to hear what the panel think about those long working hours, even from home at the moment.
Jackie, maybe we could just go back to you on that point.
Yeah, it's a tough one, isn't it? Because part of it is a bit of self-discipline, I think, as well. So it is really easy, isn't it, to stay at our desks for hours. And I think just because we're working from home, we shouldn't allow that to happen. And so for me, it is being really clear around the boundaries. And it's me setting an example as well. So I try not to do meetings after 5 because my kids are at home, and I don't want to be locked up in my office. And that's one of the benefits for me from working from home, is I actually don't have the commute time, so I can see them. So I think if you're a leader, role modelling the non-long working hours, but also role modelling the flexibility. So we did find throughout this period, as I'm sure many of you did, if people had their kids at home and they were trying to homeschool, they needed to block out some time at some stage throughout the day to get that done. But quite often they might have picked up something, you know, a little bit later at night. So from a Fidelity perspective, we've always been relatively flexible with working, you know, remotely or differently, but we're now getting a little bit more, probably putting it more into policy. So we're calling it more dynamic working. So people, if they do want to kind of work mornings and evenings or what have you, we're being a bit more flexible about it because we've seen it can work. So probably back to the question is, lead by example if you're a leader, but also put some boundaries in for yourself and keep yourself sane.
Thanks, Jackie. And that theme of leading by example was clearly mentioned and illustrated by Romael and Fraser. And Fraser, just I saw you nodding there. I just wondered you run some big teams there. Just wondered what you thought about long hours culture.
It was a bit of a guilty nod, I'll confess. Jackie's kind of lead by example resonates. This is a point where I need to thank my wife if I think about the early part of lockdown. I did get completely absorbed in work, and we talked about privilege earlier. I'm really lucky in that we have an external office at home, so I can actually walk out of the house, walk into a separate building, and we've even got separate office spaces there. But I wasn't using it at the start of lockdown. I have another office in the house, and I was getting up, going to my desk very early, and I would find that 10 o'clock at night, I was still sitting, finishing off. And if I'd gone out to even have a walk at lunchtime, I was doing really well. And I was gently encouraged, if I use that language, to take a bit of a look in the mirror and to think about looking after myself. And it is so important if we are going to change culture for our teams to lead by example. And I do think I've been a lot better since then. I'm making time to exercise every day. I am going out to the office. I hope, change my mindset that when I'm leaving the office to go back into the house, that those are two separate things. There have been some urgent things that inevitably get in the way of that, but as a kind of a core approach, that helps. And then to definitely encouraged our teams across the piece that flexible is okay. Repeatedly saying to all of my direct reports, it's not about the number of hours, it's about you working as a team to deliver what we're trying to achieve. And if you can't do it, I know these are exceptional times, tell me and I'll manage that with our stakeholders. But just share openly. This is not going to be a blame culture. So I do think we can change things. And I'd like to think that I could work smarter in the future, have to work fewer hours. I always fall into the trap of it's just easier to put another extra couple of hours in rather than be that bit clever about how I do things. Thanks. So just look in the mirror regularly.
Yeah. Well, I just, we've got a couple of minutes left before I just pass to Jane to close. And so I wondered if, in just looking forward, what aspects of, now I'm going to say strategy in a very, very general way, but what are the key things do you think we've learnt from that we should bear in mind or we should really hold as key when looking forward in our organisations? Jackie, you mentioned purpose. Fraser, you've talked about culture, etc. So I just wondered, very briefly, what do you each think are the key things we should, organisations, senior leaders should be thinking about that's been informed by this period? So I'll go back to you, Jackie, then it'll be great to get Romael and Fraser's thoughts.
Okay, so my favourite kind of piece of terminology in terms of what the future looks like from a business perspective is humanocracy. So I do think there's been something, if you look for the positives of what we've been going through, there has been a humanising for many people of how we work, who we work with, the impact that we have on our clients and the environment and the community. So for me, purpose, I've mentioned that. I think it's really, really important. I think the agility that we've seen in this situation is really important from a strategic perspective. I think the flexibility that we've seen, we've already covered off that in terms of working differently. And then I just think the ability to make faster decisions has also been quite critical throughout this period. And I think I hope that we maintain that momentum, from a strategic and business perspective, yep, that we stop fluffing around and we actually do what we need to do.
Right. Thanks, Jackie. Romael?
I think I'll share two words really, trust and confidence. I think if the leadership team has confidence and trust in their teams and similarly, if I have trust and confidence in my leaders for making decisions and trusting and having the confidence that if those decisions don't play out and don't work out correctly, they'll change them. Then I think that's for me the biggest takeaway, because that we started in one route, some things worked, some things didn't. We changed. Again, some things work, and that's part of planning and strategy, right? Like you might set the path, it doesn't work, or you might hit that dead end or wherever it might, the roadblock. You might need to change, but you need everybody to have trust and confidence, and you know, those to kind of get that in a big organization is a bigger challenge than it is in a smaller organization. But for me, that's the biggest takeaway. I think throughout lockdown, I've gained more trust and confidence in my leaders.
Right.
Definitely.
Great. Thank you, Romael. And finally, Fraser.
So I was going to make one point, but Jackie said agility, and I just wanted to add that to my list because I think it's so important. The change I have seen in their stakeholders who have been very reluctant to embrace change, to new ideas, and DocuSign, in our case, electronic signatures was we can't do that at any cost. And within 2 weeks, people suddenly embrace it. And I know it's a very small example, but it has huge implications for workflow and process and the way that we can communicate with our members. But I've already seen, as we've got some people back in the office, and I just learned yesterday that one of the members of our team is trying to reinstate everything that we did before. And so just treasuring that we've got to keep pushing on this idea of being agile in the way that we think. If it worked during COVID and it was legally okay, it's still legally okay today. The point I was going to mention before Jackie prompted me on agility was about taking people with you through transparency. And it was actually Chris Morton's question that he put up about, how do you manage organizations through right sizing? Having watched the British Airways experience through 12,000 redundancies and the impact that has on people, the openness of communication to me is the answer to all of this sort of stuff, whether you're upsizing, downsizing. If you're open with people, whilst they will not necessarily like the outcome, it's about being treated the way you would like to be treated yourself. And the people who have been treated appropriately are still big fans of the brand, even though it hasn't ended well for them personally, and they still have lots of friends in the organisation. So I would, my point would be take people with you and be transparent in all of your communication. Thank you.
Thanks, Fraser, and thank you, Jackie, Romael, and Fraser again, and for really fascinating insights and different insights. And I hope that's been helpful to our audience. So, if I may, I'll just pass back to Jane just to close the session.
Well, I would like to add my thanks to Russell's for a really fantastic discussion there. I think we learnt that how the importance of vision and purpose for organisations, and that those need to be kind of long term, but that we need to be agile around our strategy and our plans. Scenario planning is a useful tool, and perhaps recent events have highlighted that we need to plan for the worst. The poll results I thought were very interesting, with only 28% of people saying that they understood their company's strategy pretty well. So I think that highlights the importance of communication in our organisations. And that communication and transparency was mentioned a number of times through the course of the conversation. So thanks to everybody for participating. Thanks for the questions, and the recording will be available on the website. And if you've got any comments on today's session, please let us know. And if you think there are topics that you would like to explore, again, let us know. So thank you very much to everybody, and have a good day.